Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 58 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle, and I'm here in the vomitorium after a bit of a break from recording. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, we've had a hiatus.
Yes, and the person I'm talking to, and the person you just heard, is Dr. David Noe, my good friend and my co-host. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing pretty well, Jeff. Thanks.
Yeah, you feeling good tonight?
Let's see. Yeah, I'm feeling great. It's good to be back together with you, Jeff, and to have the chance to talk about the things we love. We took a little hiatus, right?
We did.
We recorded Pay No Attention to the Girl Behind the Curtain.
That's right.
Delphic Oracle. Then we had I'm sure the listener didn't notice, but we had the episode with Heather MacDonald kind of stitched together in advance. So we took a little break.
We did. You did some traveling.
I did some traveling. I went down to Florida, right? Cave Weirdum Floridianum.
Yes.
I was Beware of Florida Man.
Yeah. Did you see any while you were down there? Did you see any
Yeah,
Florida
there were
men?
some men down there. I had some car rental problems.
Oh, no.
That's a story unto itself. I had
man.
a little bit of a katabaseis.
You did.
Oh, definitely. Can tell you about that later.
Excellent. Well, that fits very well with what we're talking about
I think
tonight.
it does,
Yeah.
yes. That's why I brought it up. And
Yeah?
I got to teach the great works of the Middle Ages.
You did?
Yes.
Wow.
Some Boethius, some
yeah.
Bernard of Clairvaux, some Aquinas, some Dante.
Man.
I love that Dante stuff.
You got to teach this to some eager sponge-like minds.
Some eager young minds, so absorbent,
Yes.
right? At one time I spilled my coffee and I reached for the roll of Bounty and I said, no, these students will just soak it up.
There was no need for the roll of bounty.
Exactly. And I worked hard, I have to tell you, Winkle. I worked hard to bring them into the AN fold.
You did.
Yes.
Do you think we're going to pick up some listeners from that
Well,
crew?
I guess we'll see. Maybe they'll even get a shout out. Speaking of which.
Yes. Yes, our shout out this week goes to one Alyssa Behringer.
Yes. Can I read this one?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so a little about me. Alyssa says, I teach Latin to homeschool students aged 8 through 18 in the Chicago suburbs. She's out there in the burbs. When I'm not teaching Latin to kids, I'm teaching improvisational comedy to adults.
Oh, nice. I like that combo.
We should have her come and teach us a few things.
No doubt.
I'm working to make my Latin classes as fun and engaging as my improv classes. That's not going to work.
You don't think so?
Fun and engaging? She's teaching Latin.
Oh, come on.
Okay.
Come on, man.
All right.
All right.
My 3-year-old has discovered that her most effective bedtime stalling tactic is asking me the Latin vocabulary for all the parts of her face.
I like this kid.
Brilliant. This
Yeah.
buys her a few minutes most nights, says Alyssa, because I'm a sucker.
Oh, man. This is great.
This is great stuff. So,
Great.
Alyssa, thank you so much for being a loyal listener. Thank you for volunteering some of this information about yourself. Thank you for keeping the flame alive of Latin and classics instruction out there in Chicagoland. We're really grateful.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you, Alyssa. All right, Dave. So, shall I field the opening quote this week?
Yes. Can we tell the listeners what the episode concerns?
Yeah,
In
probably
case they didn't read one of the riveting titles that we throw up.
Right. So this week we were talking about Joseph Campbell, the famous kind of public intellectual.
The soup guy, right?
But no, that's a different Campbell.
No?
Though he came from wealth. I mean, maybe that was part of his family. I don't know.
So this is not about minestrone?
No, as much as you want it to be.
All right.
All right. No mulligatawny in this episode. It's just Joseph Campbell, the public intellectual most famous for kind of his popularizing of the monomyth, the hero's journey.
The monomyth.
The monomyth.
Okay.
With this idea that you can take hero stories around the world, you can boil them down to essential elements to the degree that we see that pretty much everybody's just telling variations on the same story.
Boiling?
Boiling?
Soup?
Oh, man, you're not going to let this go, are you?
No, I'm not. We're just going to let it simmer through the whole episode.
Man,
So Joseph Campbell and the Hero's Journey.
Yes.
That's the working title we have.
that's right. That's
okay,
right.
so you're going to read us the opening quote, please. Let's hear this.
Yes, and this comes from Campbell's most famous book, which has remained in print since 1949, his Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he writes, "It is the business of mythology to reveal the specific dangers and techniques of the dark interior way from tragedy to comedy. Hence the incidents are fantastic and unreal. They represent psychological, not physical triumphs. The passage of the mythological hero may be over ground, but fundamentally it is inward, into depths where obscure resistances are overcome and long-lost forgotten powers are revivified to be made available for the transfiguration of the world."
Interesting. So this is labeled the monomyth.
Right. And so for Campbell, the idea is that when we read stories about the Dragon Slayer, or we watch films about it, what we're really seeing is kind of a working out of what's going inside our psyches, our souls, whatever you want to call them, across the board. And so when the hero slays the dragon, that represents some kind of psychological development on your own part.
Okay, so when Rocky Balboa, right, knocks unconscious Apollo Creed,
Yes.
which is the second movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it the second one? I can't remember.
The third one's Mr. T.
Right.
And the fourth one is Dolph Lundgren.
Oh, the Russian guy.
Yes.
Yeah, or the Russian character.
I would break you.
Right.
I can't remember the first one, though.
No, I can't remember either.
So forgettable.
No, I just remember, Adrian. And
Right.
He's chugging eggs and stuff.
Raw eggs. So he beats up someone in the first movie, right?
Yeah.
And so this is the monomyth that applies to him as well. Any myth, you name it, this applies, says Campbell.
Yes, right. So we'll talk about, it is not without controversy. It's not without disagreement. I would actually say that probably in this day and age, Campbell's probably more out of favor than he is in favor in the academic world. But we can talk about these things. But yes, any of these these hero type myths, I think Campbell would say there's something why are we drawn to them? But it's something we inherently recognize about ourselves in them.
Okay.
Yep.
And is there Freudian influence on this? We're going to talk about that also. The notion of a dark interior. That seems very Freudian.
It is. There is a lot of Freudian influence on Campbell. It's mostly coming from Freud's rival Jung.
Oh.
Though it's his Jungian archetypes and his idea about the collective unconscious. That's what really gives the foundation to what Campbell comes up with. Yep.
So it's like that old band Alphaville, right?
Forever Young?
Forever Young.
Yeah. In fine form tonight.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Winkle. So
Yes.
that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the life and times, Vita et Opera, of Joseph Campbell.
Yep.
Look at the contours of the hero's journey.
Yep.
See how it may or may not apply to some keynote classical myths and maybe some pop culture also.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's get right into it.
Let's do it. All right. So we're going to begin with a little bit of biography on who was Joseph Campbell. I have to admit, last month I attempted to read what I take to be kind of the official authorized biography of Joseph Campbell. It's called A Fire in the Mind.
A Fire in the Mind.
Yes.
What is this attempted to read?
Well, I got about halfway through and I had to put it aside. Have you read biographies where you get the feeling that the author is way too much enamored of his subject?
Yes.
Yeah, and I find that insufferable.
Right. So no critical sense.
No,
Not really telling the story, just looking for episodes of victory.
exactly. And so it kind of came off much more like a hagiography than it was an informative biography. But the part of the problem I think that the biography had was Campbell himself. The way he describes his own life, he saw it in these same mythic terms that he writes about, and so it's hard to. And so he, all of his adventures as a child in the forest are replete with finding monsters and slaying them, and it just got to be too much, and I had to put it down.
You put it down.
I did.
What about Hero with a Thousand Faces? You've read excerpts, I assume.
I have, and there have been classes where I've assigned that, at least not in the whole, but in part. And one of the curious things I found about Campbell in that book is that as much as a popularizer as he was, I find so much of his writing impenetrable.
Right.
Yeah.
Obscure,
just difficult to read.
Right.
Just kind of plodding
Opaque.
prose. Opaque.
Yeah. So less tomato basil and more of a kind of meatball or something. You just can't get to the bottom of it.
Exactly. Or really thick pea soup, perhaps. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So as we warm up for this, I have to tell you that I've had some encounters with individuals who are, not professional classicists like ourselves, but who are very interested in this subject, fellow Christians, because as you know, I'm Christian. And when I tell them I teach classical myth, one individual in particular said, "Oh, well, I've read Joseph Campbell. That's all bunk." And so somewhere in the course of this episode, we have to, as I know we're going to get right near the end maybe, what about applying Campbell's theories to the Christian faith?
Sure.
Right? Where does that leave us?
Sure.
And this particular, fellow believer was very, very threatened by Campbellian, I don't know if that's the term, or Campbellite, Campbellian ideas.
Yeah.
Was quite threatened by them and just dismissed the whole thing.
Yeah, I've encountered that same sentiment as well. I think that maybe a lot of it comes from Campbell's kind of more Unitarian, kind of universalist approach to these kinds of things. So, for him, this was his religion.
Okay.
And he saw this as the things that bound all humanity together. And so I think certainly Campbell is kind of says, there's not a hierarchy of narrative, right? And so,
which means, in layman's terms, that one story can be more important than another.
Right. They are all useful and all reflective of some kind of deeper mystery.
Right.
But none should be privileged over the other. And that's probably what I think a lot of believing Christians would have trouble with Campbell. But,
right. Anyone who adopts an absolute view of the truth as applied to the deity is going to be irritated by
of course.
Campbell.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. So you got going on what is it? A fire inside the mind?
Yeah, a fire in the mind, I believe it's called.
Fire in the mind.
And so all of these pull quotes from Campbell himself are. He actually reminded me a lot of Schliemann.
Oh, yeah.
And so listeners, one of our early episodes on I take to be a similar kind of guy.
A fairly successful one, we should say.
Yes.
Some of those early ones were duds.
They were duds, but Schliemann's got good numbers.
Schliemann. Right, cleverly titled.
But like Schliemann, Campbell, he struck me as a guy who kind of believed his own hype.
Very much.
He saw himself as kind of a mythic figure, and it's almost kind of Forrest Gumpian in the kind of things that he did. He was born to a very wealthy family in New England, and with all the perks that brought, he traveled to Europe as a young boy. He talks about stories about as a teenager debating with Hindu philosophers. It's like, come on,
is that believable?
No, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. But so I just found. I think lots of Campbell's ideas are really interesting and are really quite useful in teaching and talking and thinking about myth.
For terms of pattern recognition.
Yeah, sure. And also kind of it's interpretive as well. I think there's a lot there. But as a person, I don't think Joey and I would have seen eye to eye.
Yeah, Jojo and you're not going to have a cup of coffee.
No, I think he would have rubbed me the wrong way.
I think that's pretty likely.
Yes.
Right. So, as you say, widely traveled, and this really was interesting to me. You put this together based on a previous lecture. This is, some of your excellent work here.
Yeah.
He wanted to be a combination of Douglas Fairbanks and Leonardo da Vinci.
Right. This is something he says in these famous interviews that he did with Bill Moyer called The Power of Myth back in the late 1980s.
This is the same guy that on the American Road, or that's Charles Corral.
Yeah, no, but
they're from the same
kind of PBS kind of family, right? He did a series of interviews with Campbell in the late 80s, and it's one of the ways in which Campbell really came to kind of the forefront of the American consciousness. And Moyer was asking him, what about your early life? What did you want to be when you grew up? And he was talking about his experience in the going to the early theater,
right?
The movie theaters in 1920s, and he said, I wanted to be Douglas Fairbanks, as a fighting swordsman. Combined with Leonardo da Vinci.
So Fairbanks is an early matinee idol.
Yeah, silent film.
Right?
Silent film.
Kind of like Errol Flynn.
Yeah, exactly like Errol.
So buckling some swashes.
Swashing his buckles all over the place.
Right. Strong jawline.
Yes, chiseled.
Yes.
Exactly. Right?
Swinging from the chandelier or from a rope suspended from the mast.
Yes. Exactly. With the sail kind of tearing as you go.
Correct.
Yes, right.
Rescuing the damsel. So Campbell wanted to be like Douglas Fairbanks.
He did. He wanted to kind of have that, that bravado, chest-thumping, masculine superhero type mixed with the intellect and invention of Da Vinci.
Right.
Yes.
So kind of a Lawrence of Arabia and Andy Warhol.
Oh.
Bringing it right back to the soup. Did you like that?
I did like it. Man, you're throwing lots of curveballs.
All right.
Okay. That's great.
So Da Vinci, polymath, artist.
Artist. Yeah, it's someone who could do it all.
Right.
And so Campbell says, this is what I wanted to be when I grew up. And it was very clear to me in this interview and other things I've read from him is that when he grew up, he indeed saw himself very much in these same terms.
Well, don't you think, this is a bit of a digression, in order to establish a cohesive system like he has, now for a system to be cohesive is not the same thing as for it to be true, right? But it has an internal kind of coherence. It all clings together. You look at it from the outside and, that has some plausibility, right?
Yes.
You have to be almost a kind of egomaniac, don't you?
Yes.
You have to have this enormous power to project your ideas onto others because they're going to come up with sometimes small or minor, sometimes major counter arguments. You have to be able to not let them get to you too much and just dismiss that.
Right. Without a doubt. No, I had that exact same thought. It's like without this tremendous ego, he never would have been able to project and accomplish what he did. The same thing with Schliemann too, right?
Exactly.
If he hadn't believed his own myth,
right,
he wouldn't have done what he did. Yeah. So Campbell, I think he definitely falls into that
Category, maybe?
Well, that category. I was trying to think of a descriptor for that category. It's
Archetype.
archetype.
I'm just going to keep throwing out words.
I'll say it was almost bordering on the megalomaniac, kind of like that. So, but I could be wrong.
But he could back this up with some actual education.
He did. Well, I mean, he had coming from the kind of the wealth and privilege that he did. I mean, all these things were at his fingertips. He went to Dartmouth. He studied at Columbia. He studied in Paris. He studied in Germany.
He knew Indian mythology.
Right. And so he encountered these people from all over the world. He studied linguistics. Like Schliemann, he seems to have had a great facility with language. And that helped him in kind of his comparison and contrasting of myths around the world. And
Did he become a successful academic, one of those people that gets master's and PhD degrees and goes on to a glamorous life?
Well, not exactly. He just dropped out of his PhD program.
Oh no!
And there was another famous quote by him. He says, "There's no greater symbol of ignorance than to have completed a PhD in the liberal arts." So he might be onto something there. I don't know. But he didn't finish. But then he does this weird kind of almost proto-hippie thing. Moves out. He moves into a shack in Woodstock, New York, and kind of does a Thoreau where he lives isolated for 5 years. Who knows if this is true?
What do you mean? So this is what he says he did?
He says he did.
This is supposed to be the asceterion, the ascetic lifestyle, where he learns all the elements of self-denial.
Yes.
Was this kind of his katabaseis? Go down into the cabin and come out a new man with some original idea?
Right. I think he certainly frames it in terms of like a Buddhist monk up in the mountains, kind of achieving his nirvana. But he talks about for 5 years, he denied himself the luxuries of New York City. Yeah. And he says he read
the bagels,
the bagels,
the pizza,
right, the deli sandwiches,
right,
all that stuff. And he claims that he was reading 9 hours a day. Who needs Columbia when I can just educate myself, right? Who needs those schmucks? And
is that not appealing to you at all?
Well, I like that kind of idea. It was just the way that Campbell frames it is like, well, I'm better than everybody else, and so
you're an anti-Campbellite, aren't you?
I'm actually not.
Okay,
I'm actually not. The man as a man, I think it just
not appealing.
He rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, but the ideas
are very interesting.
Right.
So then he goes off to California, and again these the instances of kismet. He meets a young John Steinbeck on the way up, and makes good friends and. With Steinbeck.
The original title was The Soup of Wrath, actually. That was the original title.
That would have been a lot better as The Soup of Wrath.
Of course. The soup was angry that day, my friends.
Very nice.
Right.
Oh man!
So he meets a young John Steinbeck.
And then he's introduced to the literary circles of California, Southern and Northern, and he's making connections along the way. It just seems like he was a great networker.
Yes,
he had to have been.
Maybe that's the second element in founding a cohesive system.
Yeah,
you have to have a certain kind of megalomania, and then you have to have persons to spread your ideas.
Absolutely right. I think that comes with kind of a very forceful extroversion, right? Right. You're gonna just assume everybody is gonna love you as much as you love yourself. So that seems very Campbell to me. So long story short, he ends up getting a position at Sarah Lawrence College.
Does he try his hand at fiction?
Yeah, so he's writing. I mean, he's very impressed with Steinbeck, and he wants to try that. He publishes a couple of short stories. He leaves a novel, I think, half finished before he realizes that he had a greater calling. And
have you read any of his fiction? Because I haven't.
No, I don't think. I mean, there a couple of short stories that made their way into magazines.
Right.
But he was not renowned as a fiction writer. He gets a job. He's offered an academic position at Sarah Lawrence College, out east. And that's where he spends the majority of his professional career. So he teaches there for 38 years and retires in 1972.
So this is without a PhD, though?
I believe so.
And this is the same guy who said, there's no greater badge of ignorance than a PhD in
liberal arts, something like that.
So eventually he made peace with the system.
He did, right.
That's a pretty plum job at Sarah Lawrence.
Right, and as I understand, Sarah Lawrence is also kind of, it's kind of a hippie poetry.
I'd be careful what you say here. Do you know any Sarah Lawrenceites? Sarah Laurentians?
I knew a couple of guys that went to Sarah Lawrence. I mean, it struck me as kind of like it's in the East. It's like the East answers to like Evergreen.
Okay.
Am I in the ballpark?
I don't know.
Okay.
These are the people that make the cake mixes, right? Aren't?
This Sarah Lawrence?
Oh, no, it's Sarah Lee. Sorry. Just off for a minute there. So he teaches there for 38 years.
Yes. Yep.
Retiring in
1972.
Yes.
Right. And it's really after that he becomes maybe he was most famous as this public intellectual. He gets tangled up with George Lucas and the whole Star Wars mythology. We'll get into that.
You don't want to tangle with George Lucas.
No, you don't. He marries a woman, Jean Erdman, who was a former student of his. And they remained married until he dies in 1987. And they lived in New York City and split time between there and Hawaii, where she was from.
That's nice.
Did not have any children.
No children.
Nope.
So Campbell couldn't have left, a pair of old, what am I thinking of here? A pair of old loafers and, a sword, underneath a rock in Central Park or something for his son to discover later on.
Man, I think if he had a son, he would have done
He would have done
exactly
something.
that. Yes,
Right.
some kind of token of recognition, right? Like a la Theseus.
Yes,
Yeah.
to prove paternity.
Right.
But he didn't do it.
He didn't. No, his life was his work, and his wife was a dancer and an artist, and her life was her work. But yeah, an interesting, fascinating, maddening guy.
I wonder if there is another biography that would be able to hold your attention, more than halfway through.
Of Campbell?
Yes, there must be something smaller, something lesser.
There probably is. I mean, I just did a search, and everything that I read said, no, this is the authorized biography.
Fire in the Mind.
Fire in the Mind. Right? So I just
Well, maybe we can ask the listeners if are there any students of Campbell out there. You can recommend a title that maybe we could read.
Yeah. All right, so fast forwarding a few years, it's in 1949 that he writes the work that he is still to this day best known for, this book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it's as turgid as the prose is that we were talking about. It's a monumental work. And if you think about what the kind of legwork that would have had to been done to do a kind of a comparative worldwide study of comparative mythology in pre-internet days, it's astounding.
That is incredible.
Right.
What do you think of the title?
I think it's a great title.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it kind of tells you everything you need to know in just those few words.
Highly descriptive, but also concise.
Yes.
So better than De Rerum Natura.
Way better.
Right.
Like about stuff, right? Right. No, this is it's a great title. It's a great title and provocative.
Yes. And in the work, he lays out the fundamentals of the
monomyth.
The monomyth.
Right.
Okay.
And I should say to listeners, if you're interested in pitch, I don't recommend reading the book because it's you'll hit your head against the wall. But chapter 4 of that book is called The Keys.
The keys.
And this is where he kind of just lays out the basics.
Okay.
So if you're interested in kind of the fundamental building blocks of the hero's journey from Campbell's own prose, that's where you need to look.
Why didn't he put that in the preface?
Who knows?
Or chapter 1? Why did he wait till chapter 4?
I couldn't make it through chapter 2, so I just flipped ahead until I found something I could read.
Chapter 4. Hero with a Thousand Faces.
So but throughout he's making all kinds of comparisons. I mean, one of the really interesting things he does in that book is he collects a lot of oral narratives that simply had not been written down before. So he was deeply fascinated with Native American mythology. So a lot of Native American folklore he collected, Indian folklore, not just kind of what you might expect. Not a lot of classical, not a lot of Norse mythology. Okay. He kind of went for the stuff that was lesser known, and I thought that was to his credit.
And the whole theory is reducible to the idea that, correct me if I'm wrong, all mythic narratives are variations on a single story.
Yes, right. And so this was kind of this is where he's kind of shaking hands with Carl Jung.
Okay.
And so Jung's psychological theories of the collective unconscious, that that's idea that if the universe only lifted its veil, we could see this mystical connection between all things.
So like in the movie Avatar, there's some kind of purple or white light that connects all living things.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So dreams and myths, according to Jung, as I understand, are expression of, quote, like you were saying, collective unconsciousness.
Yes, exactly right.
So you and I are connected unconsciously, but we're also connected to everything else.
Yes, exactly right.
And we express ourselves collectively. How?
Through the telling of myth.
Okay.
Right.
And we're only telling really one story.
Right. And so what we think, Jung talked about how what the modern world would call a coincidence is not a coincidence at all. And it's that, again, if we could kind of see behind the curtain, we could see how everything was connected. And so Campbell would say, yes, we think that we're always coming up with these new stories, and each culture produces its own body of legends and mythology with their own kind of personal touches. But if we could put them all next to each other, we'd see we're all just really telling the same story.
Every story has the same recipe.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. Did you ever hear the story Jung told about, or was drawn to, of Baum's coat?
No.
You heard this one?
Baum's coat?
Yeah, it's a fun story, and I take it to be truthful.
Well, let's hear it.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard of Baum's suspenders and his cummerbund, but his coat?
His coat, no, exactly right. Baum made some good soup. No,
You can't try to put that in there.
Sorry,
Come on.
I'm going to leave those to you.
Right.
All right. So the story goes: late 1930s, they're putting together the famous Wizard of Oz film with Judy Garland.
Oh, so we're talking about Frank Baum.
Frank Baum.
Got it.
Right. And so the story goes is that they're getting the production together, and they need costuming for a particular scene, and this scene calls for some kind of old ragged clothing. So the director or whatever sends the costume designer, says, go down to the thrift shop, just buy a bunch of stuff. We'll see what works for the scene. So she goes down there, buys all these things, comes back, and they're trying the coats and the jackets on the actors. And this actor puts on a sport coat that seems to be working fairly well. And they happen to look inside the lining, and the monogram on the jacket is L. Frank Baum.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
So that can't be a coincidence. This is the expression of collective unconsciousness.
Right. So Jung says, everybody when this story was told, what an amazing coincidence. And Jung says, no, this is the universe kind of giving us a little peek into that kind of synchronicity.
But if we're connected to all of the universe, aren't we giving ourselves a little peek?
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, I'm connected, right, to this collective unconsciousness.
Yes.
I'm a little node on the whole, the whole system, the whole network. So
Yeah.
the universe isn't giving me a peek. I'm giving myself a peek.
I guess so. But I think what Jung and Campbell would say is that the vast majority of people are completely unaware that they're connected to this thing at all.
So we need some kind of enlightenment.
Exactly,
We need
right.
a Jung or a Campbell to come along and explain.
Yeah.
You may think this is a coincidence, an expression of some really interesting new idea, but no.
But no. And I think Campbell, even more than Jung, when he wrote this book, he wasn't saying, look at this interesting thing I've noticed. Look at this interesting way of interpreting mythology. For Campbell says, no, this is the guide for your life. This is a quasi religion. So it's much more than just kind of an interesting literary theory. For him, it was his religion.
I have another Jung quote here.
Please.
He says that dreams and myths contain archetypes that are, quote, dramatic abbreviations of patterns in storytelling.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. Yep. And came back to this biography. And so Campbell talks about when he's a young kid, he literally becomes kind of one of Jung's famous archetypes is the innocent, the child, kind of the
Goldilocks character?
well, more kind of the precocious child.
Okay.
And who links up with kind of a wise mentor. And that's exactly what happens to Campbell. His parents leave him alone in this with this cabin in the woods that they bought in Pennsylvania, and there's like an older guy on site in the grounds that he meets and kind of tells him all these legends and leads him through the woods. It's Frodo and Gandalf.
Isn't that how Goodwill Hunting was? The guy down in the basement who was solving the math equations and so forth. And
Right. It's Matt Damon who links up with Robin Williams. Yeah, exactly. And so Campbell would just say, probably sneeringly, "See,
yeah,
told you."
Yeah, collective unconsciousness forcing itself out all over the place.
That's right. Won an Oscar. Told you. Right? Yeah.
I don't like this guy.
I know exactly.
I don't like this guy, especially the way that you are, presenting him.
Kind of maybe being a little bit too hard on Joseph. Yeah.
So there are stages, right? There's
Right.
stages in the hero's monomyth,
Right.
in which he's telling the one single story.
Yes.
So what's the first stage?
Well, I should say if you go on Google and if you type in Hero's Journey and you click the Images tab, you'll get like 1,000 different examples. It's usually it's a circle, it's a cycle, and so the hero stage takes you from stage one, literally all the way back to stage one, or it's sometimes it's
So I start at stage one and I go back to stage one.
Yeah, you go back. It's
a little dull.
Well, it's like in The Hobbit. When
Yes.
Bilbo writes his own book, he doesn't call
Yes.
his story The Hobbit. He calls it There and Back Again.
Oh, that's
right?
good.
So it's the hero's cycle.
Yeah, so I was traveling through O'Hare Airport this weekend.
Yeah.
And they kept changing the gate.
Oh my gosh.
Was it O'Hare? It was some airport. They kept changing the gate, saying, your flight will leave out of A11. And then they announced, no, it's A1. No, it's A11. And the people were going back and forth.
Oh man.
Yes.
Talk about a katabaseis.
It wasn't good. And airports, liminal places.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Points of transit, especially airports, are very dark liminal places. Yes. All right, so let's talk about these stages.
Okay.
And so stage 1, as Campbell outlines it, is he calls it the hero in the ordinary world.
All right.
Right. And we should say the vast majority of the stories that Campbell talks about and that he researched are masculine hero stories.
Okay.
We should do an episode about the kind of the feminine heroine journey.
This could be Penthesilea, the queen of the Amazons.
Yeah, or you like Penelope. Mm-hmm. There's Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes.
They have kind of their own unique path.
Wonder Woman,
right? Mm-hmm. But that's another episode. So
okay.
So listeners, the vast majority of what we're talking about here, we are masculine hero stories.
Mm-hmm.
So the hero in his ordinary world. Usually, the hero starts out in some kind of workaday, mundane existence. If you think about like Luke Skywalker, he's a moisture farmer, right? Frodo and Bilbo live in Hobbiton, which is kind of just a safe, snug, comfy area.
Yeah,
right?
in the Shire.
Right. It's warm, it's inviting, but nothing really happens.
And Peter Parker, he's a reporter for
like his school newspaper,
Daily Planet. No, I don't know what it is, but
well, he sells pictures of Spider-Man, right? But
okay.
But she's a schmuck at his high school, or Harry Potter is living with the horrible Dursleys,
the
right?
Muggles,
right? And so that's it provides this kind of bland palette where the adventure, by contrast, becomes that much more exciting.
So if you're going to tell a story about a fish out of his customary element, you first have to throw some water into the scene, right?
Yes, you have to create a contrast by showing him in this mundane, ordinary world.
Okay,
right. So, and that's where kind of something dramatic happens to push the fledgling out of the nest.
I got it.
Right.
So you were just a young kid from Hudsonville or somewhere like that. Where are you from? Jennison?
Jennison, yeah.
You're just out there in Jennison, just minding your own business, learning to play the guitar, learning to play the piano, involved in some sports?
Yeah, a little bit. Not successfully.
Just sporting it up a little bit?
Yeah.
Then you came to Calvin College and boom, now you're pushed out of your element and suddenly the classics, right?
Exactly.
And the organ cues and there's a new vista that opens up.
That's right. And I think if Campbell, he would say, Dave, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
Everyone lives a mythic existence. We just don't realize it. Right. So there you go.
Okay.
So something has to happen to push the hero out of the ordinary world.
And that will be the call to adventure.
Right. So this is
go ahead.
This is like it's 2:00 on the clock. Right. So if we're going around the circle of the clock. So
now you lost me altogether. I was about to say we're going to break, but now you got to tell me about the clock. What?
This is the way often the heroes Campbell's cycle is described as a clock. So there are 12 stages. So
we start at midnight.
We usually and then ordinary world is 1:00.
Okay.
2:00, and then you wind up
got it. So 2:00, call to adventure, which we're going to talk about
after the break.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good folks at Hackett Publishing. For more than 40 years, Hackett has been providing to you and me, loyal readers, the finest translations and other sorts of study guides to aid you in your pursuit of the classics and the liberal arts generally. Jeff, what do you like about Hackett?
Just today, I was in my office and I pulled a text off my shelf. It was called The Anthology of Classical Mythology.
The Anthology of Mythology.
Oh man, it's already got
it's like a rap
hot beat behind it.
That's right.
And I had no idea. I didn't realize this was published by Hackett. But it's this wonderful text that has translations of it's nearly comprehensive of classical mythology of primary sources. And I use it all the time when I teach mythology. It's just a great, wonderful text. It's got that beautiful kind of black and orange that you'd find on a vase painting.
Yes.
And it's such a useful, engaging text. My students love it, and it's from Hackett.
That's great. That's great.
That's just one of dozens.
Right. So this past week, as you know, I was doing some teaching on the great works of the Middle Ages, teaching some Boethius. I was using the Hackett translation of the Consolation of Philosophy, a very well-organized text, alternating with prose and meter, a very nice introduction, and once again, a brilliant cover. On the cover is a shot of a prison, right? In poorly lit shadows, and then you can see the gates, the bars of the prison cell, because, of course, Boethius wrote the Consolation of Philosophy while he was imprisoned,
Perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
523, 524 AD. Another excellent illustration of the artistry that Hackett puts into all of its work.
So, Ad Nauseam listeners, if you want to take advantage of Hackett's tremendous catalog, All you have to do is go to hackettpublishing.com.
Yep, HACKETT, if I may add.
Find the text you want, put them in the little grocery bin.
Yes. And you will get an amazing
20% off.
plus
free shipping.
You can't beat it.
All you have to do is type in AN2021.
That's right. That code's going to change pretty soon, right? Because
It is.
2021 is, winding to a halt
It is
pretty
indeed.
soon. But there's still time. 20% and free shipping. An amazing bargain. Check it out.
This week's episode also brought to you by the Moss Method. Dave, will you tell us about the Moss Method?
Absolutely. If you want to learn how to read Greek, if you need help to go from neophyte to erudite, I'm the guy that has the program that will give you confidence and ability in the Greek language.
Tell us how this works.
Well, I've taken the text of Charles Melville Moss. It's a public domain text from the late 19th century. I've divided it up into 4 modules. I provide you careful, line-by-line, word-by-word instruction, all the grammatical things you're going to need, all of the quizzes, the assignments, the elements that are going to help you practice your knowledge. But it is not tedious.
It's not. How could this not be tedious?
It is not dull, Winkle. It is
Okay.
not boring.
All right.
Because it is based on some incredibly interesting stories.
Oh, wonderful.
So we have a troublesome boy. That's the first one. There's a guy named Steve. He's kind of koufanous. He's a bit of a knucklehead.
There's Steve's in this?
Yeah, Stefanos. Steve's in there.
Lazy Steve?
No. And then we go on to the second reading. A troublesome boy. He has a nurse. Steve has a nurse, a gal that takes care of him. Philip hits 2 thieves with 1 decision. Boom, just like that. Some great stories. I like this one. A pedant learns about a ladder. I think that's the 5th story in the reading. A pedant wants to know how many steps are in a ladder, and the guy tells him, well, there's 10. And he says, but is it the same number whether you're going up or going down? And that's just the stuff that gets us started. Later on, you are reading from Herodotus, adapted into Attic. You're reading from Plato, from Lucian's dialogues. This is an incredible book, and I've divided it up, presented it in a way that is self-paced, expert, and accessible. So you can learn Greek.
That sounds great. So how do students go about getting into this?
Well, they should go check out some of the introductory videos I've offered for free at the website, mossmethod.com. You can check out the office hours that I'm offering. You can see how to meet with me each week and help in your Greek journey, right? You can be the monomyth of your own story.
Yes.
And you can sign up for the course. It's $2.99 per module. It comes with a number of incredible things. But there's really no excuse to not start learning today, taking your Greek from
Neophyte?
to erudite. This episode is also brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee in Portland, Oregon, who have solved all of your brew-based and aesthetic problems.
All of them?
All of them, Jeff. There are none left to be solved.
That's true. I asked that question, but I already know the answer. I guess it's true. All of them.
Yes, you've got the Ratio 6.
Love it.
You've got it in stainless steel,
I do.
I think. I've got the Ratio 8. Mine is in oyster with walnut accents.
Nice.
But they're both based on the same automatic pour-over technology.
Yeah.
It's got the bloom stage where the hot water comes down through the Fibonacci head and sits in the cone, off-gassing all the harsh, brackish tang. And then what happens?
And then, the water comes down through your favorite grounds and into the industrial carafe. Which
Right.
I gotta tell a story about my
Let's
carafe.
hear that.
So
Carafes.
the other day, I had the coffee in the morning, and it brewed up the perfect cup. And then later in the afternoon, This is about maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I came by to empty out the
Right.
carafe, and I poured it out, and I spilled some on my hand as it was coming out, and it was still warm.
It was still warm.
So it's still warm. Still drinkable.
Wow.
This is
Many hours
this is
later.
Hours later.
But not bitter.
No, not bitter.
No scorch pad
No,
underneath.
It wasn't hot because it was being heated from below. It was just the
Right.
carafe in of itself. It's unbelievable.
Incredible.
Yep.
Well, we have some good news here. At long last, Mark tells us, the Ratio 6 has earned certification by the rigorous Specialty Coffee Association. This isn't just a gold star. The SCA puts coffee makers in consideration through a gauntlet of tests, insisting on some of the highest standards in the game. The golden cup yield, right? This is a coffee to water ratio of 55 grams per liter. It must be produced within a 10% margin of error and with water brewed between 195 and 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Naturally, the 6 passed all of these tests with aplomb.
Wow, it's the Olympics of coffee making.
Yeah, it got the gold star.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so do you want a gold star coffee maker, or do you want to limp along with one of those plastic squirty machines you can pick up for $20 and immediately regret it.
To ask the question is to answer it.
That's right. So what should listeners do if they want to support Ad Nauseam and also score themselves a great coffee experience?
Well, they should go to ratiocoffee.com.
Can you spell that?
RATIO coffee.
All right.
.com. And you click on, they can buy the Ratio 6 with this offer.
They can get the 8 now too, remember?
8 is now, that's right. So either of them.
Yes, 15% off.
Yep. So put one of those in your bucket. Right?
Grocery basket.
Grocery basket. Type in ANCO.
Exactly.
And you'll get, how much off is it?
15%
off your Ratio 6 or 8.
Check it out. All right, Jeff, as we get back into things Campbell, the Campbelliana.
Yes.
We're at stage 2, the call to adventure.
Right.
And here the hero is presented with a problem, a challenge, or an adventure.
Right.
Maybe the land is dying, it's beset with a plague. Maybe like with King Arthur, they have to go off and search for the Holy Grail.
Mm-hmm. Something to maybe save that particular land.
Okay.
I've often found that in a masculine hero story, it often is maybe not so much about saving the land itself, but solving some kind of personal problem. The masculine heroes often have problems of identity.
Yeah, who is my daddy?
Who is my daddy is a huge one, right? So lots of these heroes have the father problem. If you think about, well, Harry Potter doesn't know who his parents were.
Now, it's Voldemort, isn't it?
Voldemort is not his parents. Voldemort killed his parents.
Oh.
Yes. Of course,
I'm partly trying to outrage the listeners. Can't believe I don't know anything about Harry Potter.
Yeah, exactly. You're just making enemies. I can feel it. Luke Skywalker, of course,
Yes.
his has deep father issues.
Yes. In the second film, which is actually the 5th film, we learn later,
Yeah.
he's clinging to that antenna, right?
Yes.
And refusing to believe that Vader is...
Right.
Did I spoil it for anybody?
You just did. And in that moment, he chooses to seriously overact.
Right.
No!
What's that guy? Is it George Hamill?
Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill.
Yes.
Sorry, Mark Hamill.
Right.
He chooses to overact.
He does.
We've all done that.
That's right. Exactly. Right.
Primordial scream.
Yeah. Exactly. Everybody grieves in their own
Okay.
way. Right. If you, in a classical example, of course, Oedipus has a serious father problem.
He's the archetype.
Yes. Masculine stories are often centered around one's identity and your relationship to the father.
Okay.
So in feminine stories, it's often about what's my role in society.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a social thing rather than an individual thing.
But we're not dealing with the feminine stories tonight because we don't have time.
We don't have time.
All right.
Right.
So the third stage then, we're at 3 o'clock now, refusal of the call.
Right. So
I can't take that call.
No,
Right.
can't do it like that.
Put him on hold.
Put him on hold. Lydia, take a message. Something like that. Right.
So this could be the recusatio
yes.
in literary terms.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Ovid says at the beginning of the Amores, I can't write no epic poetry, can't do it. I'll write the Amores instead.
Yes. Right. I think Campbell would say, "Yep, there it is again." Right.
Now this Campbell guy.
I know it's annoying, isn't it? So yeah. So the hero balks, does not want to leave.
At the very threshold of adventure.
Right. Makes an excuse, and there's something has to happen to kind of literally give the hero no option but to go. If you think about like Telemachus, Athena as mentor has to basically say, "Get on this ship and take this little journey."
Right. Do it.
Do it.
Pushes him out of the nest. And of course, the fear is what?
Is the unknown.
Okay.
Right? And so part of being in that safe, ordinary world is you've never really explored outside of it. Telemachus, I get the feeling, has never left Ithaca before, right? Bilbo has never left Hobbiton. Harry Potter's never left Privet Drive or whatever that house is.
Is that where he lives?
Five Privet Drive.
Under the stairs.
Yes, right. And so everything outside of that safe area is going to be weird and wild.
Right. So that's your Johnny Carson.
I'll leave that to you. Sorry.
But when you left Jennison to come to the big metropolis of Grand Rapids.
Right. With my I had stars in my eyes.
That was the unknown for you, wasn't it?
In some ways, yes.
It's exciting.
I think for me it was more when I moved to Chicago where things really became more kind of Campbellian.
Yeah, I took a long road trip after I was finished with undergrad. A long solo road trip.
Didn't you go down to Texas?
I did, actually, to Mexico. It involved some momentary nausea.
Yes.
In the great state of Missouri. It involved, scrapes with the cops. And in those days, we didn't have no MP3 players.
Oh, yeah.
It was really tough to get music.
Did you have your box of cassettes with you?
I did with my traveling boom box.
On the seat next to you?
Correct. Why is this so funny to you, Winkle?
That's awesome.
I couldn't even plug it into the cigarette lighter. I didn't even have one of those things.
Oh my gosh! So you had just
I had a
batteries,
big
like
box
9-volt batteries.
Correct. A big box of batteries, but it got me through.
Yeah.
And we didn't have GPS. I didn't know where I was going. It's basically head south and you'll hit Mexico.
Did you encounter the refusal of the call at this time? Like, did you get so far as that? I cannot go through the Taco Bell drive-through one again.
I'm a stubborn one, so
no,
I just kept going. There's that real sense of adventure.
Sure.
Yep.
Stepping off.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what's stage 4?
Stage 4 is the meeting with the mentor.
Grasshopper.
Yes, right. So this is where the young, fresh-faced hero meets with some kind of wizened figure. It's often a wizard figure, somebody who has some kind of mysterious magical power. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, for lots of audiences, this is the one that's most easily recognized.
Right.
So
in Lord of the Rings, it's what's that guy's name? Sendoff?
Gandalf?
Oh, Gandalf.
Man, you are just bent on irritating people tonight, aren't you?
the white, no, he's the Gandalf the Gray.
But he becomes Gandalf the White.
Correct. So he has his own little adventure, doesn't he?
He does. His own katabaseis.
After the Balrog.
That's right, exactly. Oh, you know your stuff.
I know some Tolkien.
So, I mean, fill in the gaps. This is Dumbledore. This is Yoda. This is Obi-Wan. Mm-hmm. This is, have you read Hunger Games?
No, but can we throw in some actual literature here?
Please, okay.
This is just all pop culture.
All right. Chiron.
Okay,
the
Centaur.
Yes, he's your ancient Greek Yoda.
He's
right? Phoenix.
To Achilles, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Mentoring him, teaching him to drink red wine and eat red meat, because that's what an infant hero eats and drinks. Mm-hmm. Teaching him how to be a doer of deeds and a speaker of words.
Yes.
Okay.
And he does this for Jason as well. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of that repeating figure. I'm trying to, what other, I mean, Athena kind of plays this
for
role.
Telemachus.
For Telemachus.
And for Odysseus.
For many other heroes, she's standing nearby. Mm-hmm. Right.
For Theseus, for Perseus.
Right.
You name it.
You name it. So you don't have to think too far. Your favorite ancient myth, your favorite modern myth, usually has this kind of figure.
Right. If you have seen one of the Avengers movies, a kid just asked me today, Quomodo digitur Latine Avenger? Utor.
Utor, yes.
Yes. In the movie, what is it? Infinity Wars, I think it is. Tony Stark is that character for Peter Parker.
Exactly.
He's the father figure, the mentor, takes him to the next level.
Right. So if the hero has father issues, the father's absent, the mentor figure comes in to take that place. Mm-hmm. Right.
And then stage 5?
Stage 5. Actually crossing the threshold.
Okay.
And so
carrying a bride or no?
Well, the threshold is a very liminal place, right? The threshold is neither in nor out; it's both.
That's an inside joke, isn't it?
What?
A running gag. You and your liminality.
You're the one who brought up liminality. I just want to point that out tonight, right? You complain about it, but you threw it on the table.
All right.
So I'm picking it up. So yes, the threshold it's the point of no return, right? You cross it, and threshold cross cannot be uncrossed.
Okay.
And you can't go back across the threshold.
If it's one of those turnstiles that once you start in, it doesn't go the other way.
Exactly.
Grab it. And
I don't want this station.
Correct.
Right. You're screwed.
But other thresholds you can go back, can't you? Why can't you go back?
Well, in kind of mythical terms, literally, if you step across the threshold, you can jump back.
But you can't go back because you've changed.
You've changed, exactly. Right.
You'll never be the same person.
Right. That's that. That idea. You can never go home again.
Heraclitus. You can never step across the same threshold twice.
Exactly. Exactly right.
So Heraclitus, it was a river.
Yes. So, in this case, the crossing of the threshold in the story, it is a literal threshold. It's the leaving of the ordinary world for the special world, from which the hero cannot return the same person.
Now, Dorothy, right? She's a female heroine, and she embarks on the yellow brick road. Mm-hmm. The road goes ever on and on down from the door where it began.
Yes,
some Tolkien.
There you go.
But why can she fill the role as a heroine?
Well, I think Dorothy is one of those figures that kind of breaks the mold. Mm-hmm. Her journey in many ways is very masculine. She, along the way, who would be her mentor?
She kills the witch. Well, the Scarecrow is kind of serving as a mentor, but you notice she is immediately joined by 3 male figures.
Right. The Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man.
Yeah, although they're kind of deficient in a lot of ways.
Right. They're kind of comic relief to some degree, right?
Yeah, and she's really providing a lot of the will for that journey.
Yeah. So maybe it's Glenda the Good Witch who kind of plays the Gandalf role in that. But you're right. Her journey in many ways is a very masculine one. I think it's one of the things that makes that story so interesting.
Yeah, as well as Judy Garland's amazing voice.
Indeed. Indeed. Yep.
So we're on to stage 6.
Stage 6, right. Tests, enemies, and allies is what Campbell calls this.
3 points. Tests, enemies, and allies.
So there's the idea that the hero has to prove his mettle. And so there are kind of some challenges along the way. Not the main challenge.
Okay.
But there'll be little things to kind of see what you're made of.
This is part of the hero montage, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Where, Rocky's got to run up the steps, drink some eggs, run back down the steps.
Punch some meat hanging from a hook.
Correct.
Right, exactly. Yeah, this is your action montage.
Yes, Superman learns how to focus his laser vision and so on and so forth.
Exactly. Peter Parker learns how to shoot the webs out of his wrists. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. It's and then along the way you also meet who's with me and who's against me. Sidekicks. Right.
So Batman gets Robin.
What other famous sidekicks?
That's about all I can think of
the most famous one.
Point.
Yeah. I guess Superman and Jimmy Olsen
all the Super Friends get Aquaman as their sidekick.
Exactly. Yeah.
And of course, for Luke Skywalker, it's again in that 5th movie, The Empire Strikes Back, where he goes down into the cave and confronts the ghost of his father, and then boom, he's off to Dagobah, I think it is.
That actually scene takes place on Dagobah. It's kind of a katabaseis within the katabaseis, right?
Oh, it's a katabaseis, like a Russian nesting katabaseis.
Yeah. It's actually my favorite scene in all the Star Wars movies.
Oh, interesting.
So it's very Jungian. Because remember he fights the specter of Vader in the cave.
Correct.
It's not actually Vader. Chops off his head. The mask explodes and he sees his own face.
His own image.
Right. And then this is before it's revealed that Vader is his father. But this
is what he could be.
Is right. And that's really deeply, darkly
Campbellian,
Jungian. Right.
So then he in that place, Dagobah, he finds out that Yoda is really his mentor. He gets the tests, the allies, the enemies, and we're on to stage number 7.
Yes, the approach to the inmost cave. So this is on the kind of the next threshold of where the main monster is going to be faced, or the main challenge. This is the entrance into the lowest part of the hero's journey.
So I haven't made a soup reference in a long time. So this would be like trying to put croutons in your soup.
That's a little bit more difficult than that.
Does that seem forced? You like croutons in your soup? They kind of float. They become soggy.
I like croutons on my salad. I mean, maybe some oyster crackers in my soup.
Oh, croutons are good in soup.
I would imagine they would be. I've never tried it. Yeah.
Maybe when we have the ad nauseum trip to Greece.
Yes.
In addition to the hayride, we can meet for some pre-trip soup tasting.
That'd be great.
Okay.
The big bag of croutons for everyone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Approach to the inmost cave.
Right. So this is Theseus entering down into the labyrinth, right? There to meet the Minotaur. This is Luke flying down into the narrow passage of the Death Star.
The trench.
The trench, right. And this is where, again, the hero often meets a moment of self-doubt. Can I do this? Is it really just up to me to do this? Often they've gone with friends, but now the friends have been lost.
They've been abandoned.
Either they're waylaid or they've been killed, and now it's just the hero going forward.
So the Knights of the Round Table, right? In the Arthurian stories, what's the
Chapel Perilous?
The Chapel Perilous.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's Galahad who goes to alone to seek the Grail.
Right. Now, was Galahad the one that had the most geometrical knowledge of all the knights? Oh, sorry, that was circumference.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Circumference?
Yes, I got it.
All right.
Yeah, I got
it's
it.
a round table.
All
Come on.
All right, next stage.
Number 8.
Number 8 is this is the supreme ordeal.
Yep.
Right, which we call in Greek. This is the katabaseis. This is the ultimate descent.
The katabaino, the going down. So the Nicaea Book 11. Those of you who are following the catalog, you can go back and listen to A Pain in the Nicaea.
Yes.
Right?
And more pain in the Nicaea.
Episodes 1 and 2 on the descent of Odysseus into the underworld.
Right.
The classic story.
Yep. It's the ultimate journey, and this is where the hero faces something that usually represents death, and to get past this, the hero has to be sometimes literally dies and is resurrected, but defeats death and gets to the other side. So like Voldemort, of course, has in his name the Mort.
Strong death.
Strong death
like
or something
Voldemort.
Like that. Right.
Yeah, he who shall always be named, I think is what they say about him. So what happens is that the audience has been led to identify with the hero.
Yeah. And so, Campbell would say the threshold moments in your own life, getting married, graduating,
Birth of a child.
Getting your first job. These are all katabaseis.
Taking your dog on its first walk.
Is that a big one?
I don't know.
Okay.
Making your first bowl of soup.
Right. From the smallest to the biggest, you do these things, and you've grown, you've changed, and the other side, your identity is something new.
Episode 1 of the podcast.
Classics as a way of life.
Classics as a way of life.
Right.
The point of no return.
Right. This is the ultimate journey. This is the ultimate point in the journey, where the biggest change takes place.
Okay. And so this makes myths a safe way to face death?
Yeah. I mean, this goes beyond kind of Campbell's ideas, but the idea that we recognize in these stories something of ourselves. Our stories are not mythic in that they're linear or circular and neatly take us through these stages. Our lives are messy, but we recognize in these stories, Campbell would say, kind of a simplifying of this mess.
Okay.
And it helps us better understand our own journey, seeing it in this very linear or circular kind of way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a second element in stage 9, right? And that is the reconciliation with the woman.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you jumping ahead on me?
I don't mean to.
Okay.
Let's jump back across the threshold.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah.
Stage 9 is seizing the sword.
Yes.
Seizing the reward.
Seizing the sword or the reward.
Okay.
Sometimes there's some kind of treasure gained.
Right. Perseus gets Andromeda.
Yes.
Or he's promised Andromeda, but he still has to deal with Uncle Cepheus.
Right.
And, Uncle Phineas, and all of those suitors.
Exactly. Theseus kills the Minotaur and he gets Ariadne, right?
Whom he doesn't really want.
No, and abandons soon thereafter. But it's still a kind of princess rescuing motif. Yeah. So yeah, the part of the reward is often the hero gets the girl, but what's as you know, the so many of the Greek hero stories don't end happily, right?
No, they don't.
No, they end on a very dark note, and so I think that in the kind of the post Disney hero stories, yeah, it ends with a marriage or a happily ever after. This idea that one of the jobs mythically or of women is they civilize men,
right?
And so they draw them into kind of their social domesticated world, and that's where they can have children and live a quiet, productive life.
But that's not a part of the Greek myths.
Not usually.
No,
it's the exception. Not the rule.
Even the good story where perhaps Medea is with King Aegeus, right? After she's rescued from Corinth with her problems with Jason. Not a happy family.
Not a happy.
Highly dysfunctional.
No, everywhere Medea goes, it ends badly. Yes.
Slaughter and carnage. Number 10.
Number 10, the road back.
Okay.
So now we're coming up the other side of the clock, and we're going back. We're going back home. And so the hero's not out of the woods yet. The treasure that's been taken is often in danger. There's still kind of chances that might be stolen away, and there's more reconciliation that has to take place. The peace has to be made with the father, or they kind of accept who one is with relationship to one's father. That's all part of the return back.
And this is where the great chase scenes are also, right?
Sure, right. You don't just walk out of the cave whistling. There's monsters, there's soldiers that are coming after you. Right?
One does not just walk out of Mordor.
One does simply not walk in or out
Something
of Mordor.
like that.
Right. So if you think about in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, they kill the suitors, but all the townspeople are up in arms.
Right.
There's a price to be paid.
It's a blood feud you got to settle.
Exactly right. So that would be part of the quote unquote the road back here. And then stage 11 o'clock. Resurrection.
Okay.
And so now the hero is returned back home, but forever changed by his experience.
You can never actually go back.
No.
Right?
Right, exactly.
You're going back across the threshold, but he's a changed man.
Right. Sometimes there's one last challenge to face there, like with Perseus returns and has to deal with the guy who had kidnapped his mother.
Yes, Polydectes.
Polydectes,
I believe, is the one who was taking Danae.
Yes, right. So he has got kind of one more monster to kill to kind of settle things at home, and that's kind of the last kind of facing of death, and now the hero stands alone at being fully resurrected.
Yeah, the Perseus story has a happy ending, actually.
It does.
He becomes the father of Perses, the founder of the Persian dynasty, and many other heroes.
Yeah, he's the Boy Scout. Right? But Heracles, Jason, Oedipus.
Trouble.
So,
number 12, the last stage.
Yes, the return with the elixir, Campbell calls it. And this is where the hero kind of shares the bounty of his experience, or sometimes it's a physical gift, brings for the benefit of his people. This is often where in ancient stories, the rug gets pulled out. I'm reminded of Gilgamesh, who returns back home with a plant of eternal life. and he doesn't eat it himself because he wants to share it with his people.
So generous.
But then a snake eats it before he can claim that gift. Right. So they return with the elixir with at least the intent to share it with the people. Sometimes it's a gift, and the populace celebrates with the hero, or sometimes it's another thing that gets lost for good.
So, Jeff, we've been through the 12 stages. We've covered all of the different elements of the monomyth, the single narrative journey, and we've tried to weave into it a number of different examples from pop culture, from literature, from classical literature. What about the connection between Campbell and George Lucas?
Right. So this is one of the things that really brought Campbell into the public eye. And there's a great story, which it might be apocryphal, but there's probably a lot of truth to it as well.
I think it's apocryphal.
It's certainly apocryphal.
I don't know. I just wanted to say the word apocryphal,
right?
Because it's a misuse of the Greek. But
Gotcha. Well, the story goes like this. So George Lucas, he's a young man. He's in USC film school. He's making his student films. He's working on various things. And a friend of his comes to him with this book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, and says, George, I know you're interested in this myth stuff. You want to create your own kind of myths. You might like what this guy has to say. So Campbell reads the book.
Lucas reads the book.
Sorry, Lucas reads the book. And he's drawn to that chapter of the hero stages. And what really struck him was he had already written an early draft of what would become the first Star Wars film, Star Wars 4. And he says, oh my goodness, I just wrote that story without any idea of this order. And he was so struck by that, and he was so inspired by that, he went back to the script and he retooled it so it adhered even more specifically to Campbell's outline.
Fascinating.
And then Star Wars explodes on the screen. And whatever you think of the Star Wars mythology, it's hard to kind of overstate what an atom bomb that was in pop culture. I mean,
right.
To this day,
yes.
it was huge.
I have family members totally devoted to the story.
Yes. And
I think really, if I may,
yeah.
I think it's just that the opening scene, you have that giant Dorito chip that comes in overhead.
Yeah.
The special effects are amazing, at least by the standards of the time.
Yes. Oh.
That's what sold me.
It was a spectacle. Nobody had seen anything like it.
A space opera, they say.
Yeah. And once it became really popular, Lucas started to drop Campbell's name, and kind of the rest is history. But I think Lucas did a kind of a brilliant thing. The famous tagline of Star Wars that you see before every film is long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. And you think about what Lucas is up to. It's everything about Star Wars visually says this is futuristic.
Correct.
Light speed, interplanetary travel. But he's not saying thousands of years from now in a galaxy far, far away. He said long, long ago. He's basically saying, I'm telling you an ancient story, but I'm telling you it in a way that you've never seen it before.
Yeah, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
If only the remaining scripts had been as good.
Exactly.
Right? What was the one with Jar Jar, the Phantom plot?
Well, let's not talk about Jar Jar.
Okay.
But I thought that was, Lucas found a way to kind of, again, basically like Campbell said, tell this same story, but tell it in a way that was going to blow people's minds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we got a closing quote.
We do.
Which is going to take us into a brief discussion of how these theories of Campbell might impact Christian theists.
Right. So shall I read this? You want me to
Yeah,
read this?
sure.
Okay.
Let's hear this.
Yeah, so this comes from a 2000 documentary called Joseph Campbell, A Hero's Journey. Not a very inventive title for that documentary, right? In which the interviewer asks, what's your notion of God? And this is what Campbell said. He said, God is a metaphor for a mystery that absolutely transcends all human categories of thought, even the categories of being and non-being.
Hold on now. You lost me already.
What?
You can't transcend categories of being and non-being.
Why not?
That's just nonsense.
Okay.
How can you transcend something that doesn't exist?
All right, let me just finish the quote.
Okay, all
Then
right.
then you can complain.
I might break in again with some irascible comments.
Please do. Those are categories of thought. I mean, it's as simple as that. So it depends on how much you want to think about it, whether it's doing you any good, whether it is putting you in touch with the mystery that's the ground of your own being. If it isn't, well, it's a lie. So half the people in the world are religious people who think that their metaphors are facts. Those are what we call theists. The other half are people who know that the metaphors are not facts, and so they're lies. Those are the atheists. So I find this incredibly wishy-washy.
Okay.
Yeah. But one of Campbell's famous lines that he told his students was, Professor Campbell, what should I do with my life? And he'd tell them, follow your bliss. Right?
Is that Marie Kondo?
Marie Kondo?
You know who Marie Kondo is?
No.
Oh, the great sorter. Right? You look at a piece of clothing or some other object in your home, and if you're trying to decide whether or not to keep it, like an old pair of socks, the question you ask is, does this spark joy?
Oh, really?
You don't know this?
No, I'm going.
Troglodyte.
I don't have any pairs of socks that spark joy. I'm going barefoot tomorrow.
You have to throw them all out.
Man.
You take everything you own, you put it in a big pile on your bed or somewhere else, and you ask, does this spark joy? If the item doesn't spark joy, you toss it. This is how you simplify your life.
Okay.
It's like follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss.
It's kind of similar.
Right. So here's what Campbell, I think, gets kind of squishy and a little too new agey for my taste.
Right.
With this idea that, what should I do with this, Professor Campbell? Well, if this works for you, roll with it. If it doesn't work for you, well, consider it a lie.
This seems like it could justify all kinds of behavior that we would consider really immoral and cruel.
I agree, right? And so it's kind of unmoored from any kind of morality.
Correct.
Right. And so I think, like, what I really like about Campbell is I think this way of kind of breaking down a legend is really helpful. It's a really good way to kind of start to kind of get under the hood of a narrative. When it becomes a life philosophy, that's where he kind of loses me.
You part ways.
Yep.
Well, I think that the philosophy or the metaphysics behind these statements, I don't find it all defensible. But, that's because I believe there is something like objective truth, and that reason and logic, done properly, at least reflect that objective truth. So again, transcending the categories of being and non-being. Right. So the story of Christ, right, has elements that we've seen in this monomyth.
Well, without a doubt.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so the question is maybe a chicken and egg question, right? Is the Christ story reflective of this monomyth, or do the other kinds of myth stories, are they getting at something that's ultimately true, of which the Christ story is the archetype?
Right. Yeah.
And I take that as more likely. And in fact, just to put a name to it, a guy that I thought was a great critic of literature, maybe not a great philosopher, C.S. Lewis, liked to say that all of these myth stories were deliberate counterfeits of the real story in a kind of deceptive fashion. I don't know if that's provable.
That's a stretch for me.
Well, I don't think
deliberate counterfeit.
I don't think it's false. I don't think you can falsify it. Right? I think there's something persuasive about the idea. Right. If one believes, as I do, and you do, the Christian story is ultimately true, how do you explain these other approximations?
Right.
So Lewis is onto something, not counterfeits in the sense of meant to fool people, perhaps, but reflections.
Sure. No,
perhaps.
I'd go along with that. I just finished a biography of Tolkien, in which Lewis looms large.
Correct.
They were.
I saw a bad movie based on that.
Oh, we should. I'd like to talk to you about that. But he recounts in that the biography talks about Lewis's own conversion to Christianity, and this famous line for him where he's thinking about these mystery narratives,
right? And
he said something about something like this myth of the dying God, it actually seems to have happened once,
right?
And so the Christian story is kind of the physical embodiment, real working out,
right,
of the hero's narrative.
Right. There are also some. Were you finished?
No. Well, I think that Campbell has his finger on something. I think this is the story with a capital T and S.
Correct.
This is the story, and I see no harm or anything antithetical to my own faith in seeing this reflected in my own life,
right,
and in many of the stories I read. If anything, it just kind of reminds me that, yes, this is a story that the world is obsessed with,
right
for good reason.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Another kind of minor point before we wrap up is that, some of the profound differences between the Christian story and these myths, they are, at first sight, prima facie differences. They seem slight, but they're actually profound. One would be that in many of these katabaseis, the person doesn't actually die.
Right.
They like Odysseus, Aeneas, they descend to the underworld as living persons.
Yes.
Whereas in the Christian scriptures, Christ actually dies.
Exactly.
And that might seem, that's just a technicality, but no, there's actually a profound truth behind that.
Yeah.
That these other stories don't really get to.
Right. No, I agree with all of that.
Well, Jeff, that takes us right to the end here.
Yep.
So let's give out our thank yous, which
Yes.
are not at all obligatory, but heartfelt.
Yes, we have to thank, as always, Mishka, our wonderful engineer, who does all the pulling the levers behind the curtain.
The mixing, the cutting, the editing, the splicing and splotching. She does a great job. Thank you, Mishka.
She does. Thanks also to Ken Tamplin and Scott Vincent for the shredding music.
Incredible stuff.
Yep.
Scott has a new album coming out. I don't know if I haven't heard all of it, just a few tracks. He's a blues guy, kind of like a Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Great stuff.
Eddie Van Halen together. And Ken has a vocal academy. If you want to learn how to sing better than anyone else, you can check that out.
Yep.
And what's coming up next week?
Next week, we are going to tackle some Ovidian vignettes.
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 Some Ovidian. So some stories selected from the Metamorphoses.
Right. Which is a massive work.
245 different mythological stories.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to pick and choose very carefully.
Yes.
And just tell a couple, right?
Yeah, we'll break them down.
And keep the listener in suspense until that time.
Yes, we will.
And so, Jeff, I believe that we want to say to the listeners, please, you can go to Apple iTunes. Please leave us a review if you'd like. Give us some stars or no stars, whatever you like. Tell your friends about it. We have stickers to distribute. You can check out on our Lurch with Merch page or a nice T-shirt. Leave a little tip under the wine glass, so to speak, if you liked the meal, so that we can keep doing what we're doing if you enjoy it.
Yep. And if you want to drop us a note, we'd love to hear from you. You can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V, or Jeff at adnauseum.com. Also, again, don't forget the V. We'd love to hear from you. We love your enthusiasm. We love your ideas. Don't hesitate to drop us a note.
We'd love that. And Jeff, you have the gustatory parting shot.
Yes, this comes from one Isabel Allende, who once said, despite being English, they served an edible meal.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.